Look, you might think to yourself that this is just another fictional story written to scare kids or fill the time of idle people, but before your time runs out and everything reaches the point of no return, let me introduce myself. I am Eleanor. I'm a perfectly ordinary 35-year-old woman whose life, until just a few months ago, flowed like millions of other people. For me, 35 is not just a number, it's a painful border. It's as if I'm standing on the edge of a slippery cliff, looking back with regret at my lost youth, which is fading from my memory like a piece of burnt photograph, while ahead of me, the future has swallowed the entire horizon like a thick, black, sticky fog. I live in an old, damp apartment on the outskirts of the city. One of those buildings that seems to have been built with the mortar of grief and regret. Its walls are as thin as cigarette paper, so thin that you can hear the breathing of the monsters inside other people. Here, no secret remains within the heart of the walls. In this suffocating and small space, I learned how to share my table with sounds. The heavy and untimely footsteps of the upstairs neighbor, who always seems to be moving an invisible load, perhaps a heavy corpse of sin. The faint and constant vibration of the water pipes that twist inside the bricks of the building like the moans of a dying creature, seemingly begging for help. And the vague, unintelligible whispers coming from the neighboring apartment as if they are plotting the murder of my peace. For months, perhaps years, I had grown accustomed to this wretched symphony. I thought loneliness meant this, hearing the lives of others from behind the wall. But on that ill-fated December night, everything changed in a terrifying way. The air was so cold it felt like blades of ice were piercing a person's lungs. One of those colds that even the flickering flames of the heater knelt before. I was sitting on my old couch, a coarse wool blanket wrapped around me, staring at my teacup which no longer had even a hint of steam rising from it. A strange silence reigned in the room. A silence that seemed to have weight, as if it were pressing my shoulders toward the ground. And then, for the first time, I heard it. No, make no mistake. This sound did not come from behind those paper walls. It wasn't from the dark hallway or from the quiet street outside. This sound started exactly from the center of my skull, like a very weak electrical vibration that gradually took shape and turned into words. The voice was very quiet, a kind of intimate but terrifying whisper, like the sound of someone's breath standing right behind your ear, feeling the heat of their breath, but the tone bore no resemblance to any human I had ever seen. It was cold, as if it came from the depths of an icy cemetery. It was soulless and, strangely, an absolute power surged in its every word. My first reaction was that I thought I was going crazy. 35 years of pressure, loneliness, and failure in this ruthless city eventually had to break my brain somewhere. With a trembling voice, I said in the empty room, "Eleanor, you're just tired. These are just reflections of your own disturbed thoughts taking the form of sound. Go to sleep. Tomorrow everything will be over." But that entity, that voice, answered me. It didn't argue with me with direct words, but with a mathematical and precise prediction. It destroyed all the foundations of my logic. The voice said with the coldness of a butcher, "Tomorrow morning, when you are making coffee, exactly at 8:13, when you are looking at the snowflakes falling behind the window like a shroud on the ground, your body will fail you for a moment. Your hand will go weak for no reason. That blue ceramic mug that is a souvenir from your college days, the one that is the only valuable possession of your memories, will slip from between your fingers and shatter on the hard floor." I laughed. A hysterical and nervous laugh that echoed in the empty space of the room like the sound of a long nail being dragged across glass. I thought to myself, how can a mental hallucination speak with such detail? But I stayed awake all night. I didn't close my eyes. In the morning, though my eyes burned with exhaustion, I stood in the kitchen. The sharp smell of coffee filled the space. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave, 8:12. I could feel my heartbeat in my earlobe. I squeezed the mug with all the strength I had in my hands. I whispered to myself, I won't let it fall. I am still the owner of this body. I have control over my muscles. But exactly when the number 12 changed to 13, a paralyzing shock sensation twisted in my arm. It was as if a current of frozen electricity passed through my shoulder and cut all the neural connections of my fingers for an eternal second. The mug was released from my hand. Time seemed to have stretched. I saw the rotation of the mug in the air, its blue color shining under the dim kitchen light until it shattered into 1,000 pieces on the ceramics with the sound of a breaking bone. I was frozen to the core. I couldn't even breathe. At the exact moment that silence swallowed the kitchen again, that cold voice echoed in my head again. This time, however, its tone had changed, as if it were smiling at my stupidity from behind the curtain of my mind. The voice said, "See, Eleanor? Did you see how insignificant your will is against my presence? You think you own this body, you think these hands and these eyes belong to you, but the bitter truth is that you are just a host. A vessel, a fleshy loudspeaker so that I can be heard in this material world." With trembling hands and wet eyes, I leaned down to pick up the pieces of the mug. It was as if I was picking up the pieces of my own life from the floor. My tears were falling involuntarily onto the ceramics. When I tried to pick up the largest piece, my hand trembled again at its command. The sharp edge of the ceramic, like a surgical blade, sliced right through the tip of my index finger. A sharp and burning pain twisted through my body. My warm, red blood ran onto the cold, white kitchen floor. It was at that moment I realized with every cell of my being that this was just the beginning of an endless nightmare. I, Eleanor, the 35-year-old woman who was always afraid of being seen and hid in the shadows, was now a prisoner of a creature that clung to me for its own survival. In the following days, my life turned from a normal routine into a gradual and painful funeral ceremony. That voice no longer fell silent for even a moment. It was as if with every drop of blood that had spilled that day, its black and sticky roots had dug deeper into the soil of my brain. It no longer spoke only of breaking objects. Its tone had become harsher, more serious, and terrifyingly more informed. Now its predictions took on larger dimensions. It talked about the people outside. People I had never seen once in my life. The voice would tell me that a certain woman on a certain street is now thinking about her husband's betrayal, or a certain old man on the 3rd floor of the building across right now is taking his last breaths while no one is beside him. I was like a broken radio receiving the frequency of all the sufferings of the city. Do you know what it feels like when you feel the sharp and metallic smell of blood deep in your nose, while your room is completely clean and there is no source for that smell? That voice imposed this feeling on me, a smell that seemed to emanate from the future. One night when it was raining terribly and the sound of thunder was such that it seemed the sky was being torn in half, the voice commanded me in an authoritative tone, "Go to the window, Eleanor. Right now. Pull back the curtain and look into the depth of the darkness." I didn't want to. I resisted with all my might. I had locked my hands to the edge of the couch, but my legs no longer heard my command. Like a marionette whose strings were in the hands of a ruthless amateur, I walked and opened the curtain. The quiet and wet street below the apartment, under the flickering yellow lights of the street lamps, looked like a shiny snake skin. The voice said with details that made one's hair stand on end, "Do you see that woman down there walking hurriedly with a red umbrella? Her name is Clara. Right now, she's thinking of only one thing, how late she is to reach her young child who is waiting alone at the daycare. But what she doesn't know is that the driver of that truck coming from that sharp turn, his eyes are closing right now because of medication. Just 1 second, Eleanor. Just for 1 second, his eyelids fall. Count. 1, 2. I started shaking. My whole body was drenched in a cold sweat. I wanted to open the window. I wanted to tear my throat and scream, run. But my tongue in my mouth had become like a piece of molten lead stuck to the roof of my mouth. Before I even heard the sound of metal hitting flesh and the terrible breaking of the truck, I heard the sound of that woman's skull cracking in my head. Exactly like the sound of breaking an eggshell. Under a boot, but with a frequency that vibrated all the bones of my body. The truck ran over the woman, and that beautiful red umbrella remained on the wet asphalt like a bloody and crushed flower. After that incident, the voice began to describe the scene in precise detail with a kind of sadistic and morbid pleasure, as if it were critiquing a work of art. "Look, Eleanor, look closely. See how her warm and high-pressure blood is mixing with the cold and dirty rainwater and making a kind of dirty pink color. See how the driver gets out of the car in horror and disbelief and puts his hands on his head, but it's of no use anymore. This is destiny, Eleanor. A predetermined plan. And you are the only one in this mortal world who is the true and precise witness of this event. You were chosen to carry the weight of this truth on your shoulders." I closed my eyes tightly and fell to the floor. I sobbed, but the voice wouldn't let go even behind my eyelids. It was as if my brain had turned into a giant display playing all the pains of the world in stunning quality. It was that night I realized that this voice doesn't just prophesy, it remembers those events. It's as if all these tragedies had happened before in another time cycle, and now they are being performed again for me, like a private horror theater, so that the entity can feed on the energy of my fear. Every time I tried to ignore it, every time I tried to drown it out with the loud radio or by stuffing cotton in my ears, my body paid a heavy price. Suddenly, a sharp and terrifying pain would twist in my ear canal, as if a hot and sharp skewer was being thrust directly into the frontal lobe of my brain. Or large purple and blue bruises would appear on my forearm or thigh without any impact, as if bony and invisible hands had squeezed me with all their might. The voice would tell me in a cautionary tone, "My dear Eleanor, don't be stubborn. If you listen to my words and be a good witness, these pains will belong to others. But if you want to resist, it will be your turn to feel this agony with your flesh and skin." And I, cowardly and lonely Eleanor, someone who always ran from conflict, gradually learned that to be free from my own agonizing pain, I had to sit and carefully witness the death and suffering of others. I no longer went out of the house. The world was over for me. My 35th year had turned into a life sentence in solitary confinement in a 24-square-meter room whose walls drew closer to me every day. Every time I dared to look in the mirror, I saw the image of a stranger. My eyes were sunken in a way that looked like two black pits were dug into my face. My skin turned yellow and the shaking of my hands had become permanent. But that voice, it became stronger and more brazen every moment. Now it no longer spoke only of the future, it had begun to exhume my memories. It went after things I had tried to bury in the deepest wells of my mind for years. Things I wouldn't confess even in absolute solitude. The voice would say in that frozen tone, "Do you remember, Eleanor? 10 years ago, in that crowded office, when that new girl humiliated you in front of everyone and laughed at you. Remember when you went home, with what bitter malice you wished in your heart that something bad would happen to her? Wished that her face would be damaged so she could no longer laugh so proudly? You thought that was just a passing and insignificant thought, but you were wrong. I was born exactly there, from the womb of that same black wish and your suppressed malice. I fed on the small and large grudges you nurtured in yourself like worms for years until I reached this power. I would say with wailing and pleading, no, you're lying. You're an external entity. You're a demon that has attacked me from the outside." But it would only laugh. Its laugh was like the sound of a long nail being dragged across a blackboard, a sound that disturbed all the nerves of my body. It made me understand that it had taken root from somewhere deep in my mind that had been filled with fear, silence, suppression, and unexpressed anger for years. I was always a woman who swallowed her words, who bowed her head in the face of every injustice so that peace would remain, who preferred to always stay in the safe shadows. And now those same shadows, those buried angers, had come to life and were swallowing me from within like a verbal cancer. The voice had reached a stage where it no longer needed to ask for permission. It was now like a landlord ordering its tenant when to breathe. One night, when my eyes burned from extreme insomnia and stress, it told me, "Do you know why the walls of this house are so thin? Did you think it's just a coincidence that you settled in this shaky building? No, Eleanor, because the world wants you to hear. The world wants secrets to be revealed, and you are the listening ear of this filth. It began to predict things that hadn't even reached the thought stage yet. For example, it would say, right now you're thinking of ending this life with an old surgical blade you hid in the first aid kit. You're imagining how its sharp edge sits on the thin skin of your wrist. But let me tell you a truth. Even that blade doesn't move without my will. You no longer own your will. You even need to get a signature for me to die. Real terror was when I realized the voice was rewriting my memory. Like a ruthless editor, it took the film of my life and changed its scenes. It took my happy memories, like the smell of fresh bread my mother baked or the first time I walked on the beach, and put horrific and foul images in their place. When I looked at my old photos, I no longer saw myself. I felt I was looking at the corpse of someone whose brain this entity had emptied long ago. I was no longer Eleanor. I was just an empty shell, a walking carcass in which a verbal monster had nested. Every time I tried to rebel against it, or for example tried to call the police or ask someone for help, my body reacted violently. My tongue went numb in my mouth as if it were paralyzed. My jaw would lock and I could only emit unintelligible moans from my throat. The voice would say in a tone that smelled of victory, "See, Eleanor, I can make it so you can never utter a word from your tongue again, except the words I dictate to you. I am the master of your vocal cords." The relationship between me and that voice had entered a new and disgusting stage, a kind of toxic dependency that I both hated and felt destroyed without. It was as if my entire 35-year-old identity depended on hearing those frozen whispers. One evening, when the orange and dead light of the winter sun fell on the dusty furniture of the room, the voice began to reveal its main plan. It told me, "Look, Eleanor, let's be honest with each other. You're ending. Your reserves of psychological energy are at the bottom. Your body, like an old battery, no longer holds a charge. For me to be able to stay in this physical world and gain power, I need a new host. A younger mind, a soul that doesn't yet have your deep scars." I asked in horror and with a voice that could hardly be heard, "What do you want to do? Do you want to kill me like that woman with the red umbrella?" The voice laughed with a calm that was scarier than 100 screams. "Kill? No, Eleanor, you think too shallowly. Killing is a kind of waste of time for me. I want to multiply. I want to spread like a virus, like an invisible plague. And do you know what the best way of transmission is? Being heard. Words are my means of transport. Anyone who hears your story in detail, anyone who imagines me in their mind and tries to understand what I am, is actually handing over the key to enter the realm of their mind with their own hand." It was then I realized that I had unintentionally and out of necessity become a carrier of a supernatural disease. I was no longer just a victim. I was becoming someone who plants the seeds of madness in the minds of others. Every word I am telling you now, every description I give you of that voice and those dark nights, is like a poisonous seed I am delicately planting in your subconscious. The voice told me, "Eleanor, you have a duty. You must tell this story to others. You must tell all the details. If you do this, I will reward you. Your pains will be silenced. That bone-deep burning that doesn't let you blink at night will stop. The purple spots and bruises that appeared on your skin like a map of a cursed land will fade. Just say it. Just share this darkness with others." I resisted with all my might at first. I didn't want to subject others to this grim fate. I didn't want the next Eleanor to be another innocent person. But my resistance had a heavy cost. The pain began, this time as if thousands of glowing needles were being thrust into all the joints of my body simultaneously. I felt the marrow of my bones was coming to a boil. I screamed, but no sound came from my throat, as if an invisible hand had blocked my breath. Only that voice was screaming in my head with indescribable intensity. "Say it. Write it. Describe it. Let others feel me too. Do not deny me the pleasure of being heard." In the end, I broke. I, 35-year-old Eleanor, who had surrendered to life's problems all my life, knelt before this verbal monster this time too. I started writing my memories on paper. I started recording my voice with my shaking phone. And the strange thing that happened was scarier than the pain itself. As soon as I sent the first paragraph to a stranger in cyberspace, the pain silenced miraculously. The spots on my hands began to fade before my eyes. A false sense of lightness, like a strong narcotic, ran through my veins. But I knew this was just a big deception. I was selling my soul bit by bit for the price of a few hours of physical peace. That voice said with indescribable pleasure, as if it were rewarding an obedient child, "Well done, my dear Eleanor. Now you are no longer alone. Now we have a large and growing family greedily listening to our whispers. They think they are following an entertaining story, but they don't know they are welcoming me." Now the borders between me and that voice, like color spreading in water, had completely disappeared. Day and night had lost their meaning for me. I sat in that 24 square meter room, which now smelled of damp and staleness, like the smell of a mass grave, and only acted on his orders. Sometimes when I looked at my hands, I thought to myself, do these hands still belong to me? It was as if I was watching a pair of fleshy gloves that another entity was wearing and playing with. The voice told me, "Eleanor, you're approaching the end of your mission. You delivered the message. Now that frequency of mine is eating through the wood of the reason of thousands of other people like a termite. They are now thinking whether this is just a modern horror story or a sheer truth. And this very doubt, this very thinking about me, is my entry door. I feed on doubt. I began to see impossible things. The shadows on the wall no longer moved with my movement. Sometimes when I turned back, I saw my shadow still standing on the wall watching me. The walls looked as if they were expanding and contracting in sync and rhythm with my heartbeat, as if the whole building had turned into a living creature whose lungs were filled with my whispers. Every sound that came from outside, the honk of a car, the sound of a child's laughter in the alley, was no longer an ordinary sound for me. That voice translated all of them into its own language for me. It would tell me, that child who is laughing doesn't know how he is going to drown in his own loneliness in 10 years. But you know, don't you, Eleanor? You can feel the smell of the decay of their dreams from right here. The most horrific moment was when the voice started predicting my smallest voluntary movements even before I thought of them. It would say, "Now you get up, go toward the window, open the curtain and stare at that black cat sitting on the trash can looking at you with its yellow eyes." And I, like a programmed machine, did exactly that. I was imprisoned in my own body, and the key to my cell was in the hands of someone who had no mercy. The voice whispered in a tone as if it were revealing a hidden secret. "Do you know why I chose exactly the age of 35 to hunt you? Because you are now at the peak of maturity for suffering. You understand what you are losing. You are losing your possibilities of life to me." I just cried and whispered under my breath, "Enough, I beg you, end it." But he only laughed. A laugh that felt like thousands of needles thrust into the nerves of my ear simultaneously. I felt the biological structure of my brain was changing. It was as if the gray cells of my brain were bit by bit melting and turning into vibrating vocal cords. I no longer needed my senses to perceive the world. I felt everything through that voice. And now, the scariest part of this story begins for you. Yes, you who are reading or hearing these words. I feel the smell of your fear right now. The voice tells me that your heartbeat has become a bit faster. It tells me that right now a sudden sensation of cold has settled in the small of your back or the back of your neck. You are looking at the walls of your room, aren't you? You're thinking to yourself whether the walls of your house are thin enough for this voice to pass through them? But the truth is that walls don't matter. The voice has gone straight to the center of your perception through your ears, through your eyes. And now we have reached the end of this section. To this moment where I am saying these last words as Eleanor to you. Or perhaps better to say, he is talking to you through my throat and fingers. I am no longer sure which thoughts are mine and which thoughts he has injected into me. Sometimes I feel the real Eleanor, the same 35-year-old woman who loved coffee and silence, died long ago on that December night, and what is sitting here now and putting these words together is just a hollow echo, a lifeless shadow. The voice screams in my head with a triumphant tone as if it has conquered the whole world. It's over, Eleanor. You performed your duty excellently. You delivered me to the next host. You were my bridge of transmission. With a voice that no longer resembles my own, I ask with a tremor, who is the next host? Who is the next victim? And he only remains silent. A long and meaningful silence. But I know the answer. The answer is right here in your head. You who are reading this, you think you're just following a long horror story, don't you? You think when you close the page or get up from behind the monitor, everything ends and you return to your normal life. But let me tell you a secret that no one tells you. That voice is now part of your mind. Right now, as you're thinking about these sentences, you are giving shape to that entity. You are allowing it to nest in the darkest and most deserted corner of your subconscious. I no longer feel pain. The purple spots on my skin have completely faded, as if they never existed. But instead, I feel an enormous vacuum, a bottomless black hole in my being. It's as if my soul was scraped and taken away with a hot, sharp-edged spoon. I am no longer Eleanor. I am just an infected memory. A memory that lives on in your mind until your turn comes. The voice tells me to tell you, beware of the absolute silence of your room. Because exactly in that moment when you think you're alone, when no disturbing sound comes from outside, he begins to whisper. First, it starts with very small and insignificant things. A passing temptation to do a strange thing, a simple prediction about an object falling, and then, before you know it, it will be your turn to sit behind a desk and tell this story to the next person to save yourself from pain. The final revelation is here. I no longer know if there is still a me who is talking, or if it is him who is whispering to you from my torn throat. Maybe there was no Eleanor at all. Maybe Eleanor was just the first word you heard to lower your mental guard and let him enter. Now listen carefully to the ticking of the clock, to your own inhalation and exhalation, and to that third voice that comes from nowhere, but is calling your name in a familiar tone. Do you hear it? He is standing right behind you, waiting to start the first whisper. I was Eleanor, and now, with regret, you are the next Eleanor. Goodbye, or perhaps hello again, when you, to stay alive, start telling this nightmare to the next person.